Here we go. All right. Everybody, how are you? Thank you for coming. Sandy Beck's calling me back.
Say something about membership really
All
quick.
right. I gotta start this. So anyway, welcome everybody to our second Zoom presentation of 2021. I'm so excited to have this. This is going to be a really great presentation. We have about 65 people that are on here. I want to just mention renewals have been coming in really well. We need your renewals. We need your membership. We're doing these Zoom meetings with all these interesting speakers each month, and now we are going to add virtual home tours, which is going to be very exciting. So I'm thrilled. And we went to see the house the other day. I've been there before, but it's such a beautiful house, and he's got so much stuff in it, so many good stuff, some good antiques. So we don't have a date for that though. It's going to be in March. Let me talk about the first March event. After this one, we have, and nobody really talks about that. Everyone talks about, oh, the new stadium, when it's going to be beautiful. And I passed it, and it looks really beautiful. But nobody talks about the old Hollywood racetrack. And I didn't go to the races a lot. I didn't grow up here, but I did go there, I think in '77, once or twice with friends. But then I did go to the opening of the new Costco. The first Costco opened up right across the street from it. So that's also my memory of Hollywood racetrack. But Clubhouse Turn, The Twilight of Hollywood Park by Michelle Asselin. On December 22nd, 2013, the world famous Hollywood Park racetrack closed its doors forever in 2014. Demolition began on the landmark racetrack, effectively erasing 75 years of history. Photographer Michelle Asselin spent every day at Hollywood Park in the last 2 weeks before it closed, photographing the buildings, the employees, and patrons of the track. So this will be on March 17th, exactly a month from now at 7 o'clock. That should be pretty good. The last week in March, we don't have the date yet, but we'll let everybody know, of course, is when we're going to do the virtual home tour of Joseph Guidera's house. I don't know if Joseph, are you on here tonight? I don't hear him. All right. Got a great house, 303 North June Street. He doesn't mind you saying it's his house for the address. And it'll be the last week in March. Judy?
Hi, Richard. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to mute myself.
Everybody, this is Joseph Guidera. Of course, this is a profile picture of him, but he does have moving parts. He's not moving in this picture. But Joseph's house is stunning. He redid it, restored it, beautifully done. A lot of beautiful antiques in there, and we're so excited. So we're going to be filming that, I think, the first weekend in March, and then we'll let you know the exact date. But it'll probably be in the evening. I think the evenings are fine for a home tour. What do you think? We usually do them in the daytime. Does anyone have a preference for times here? Let's hear it. Anybody? Nope. All right, so we're probably doing it in the evening. All right, so then we're going to our guest now. Our guest is Nathan Marsak. I was perusing, I got the biography that Jim sent to me from Angel City Press, but I found these two other ones, and I just want to share them with you. There's 3 biographies of Nathan Marsak. They're short. So Nathan Marsak is a Los Angeles historian, preservation advocate, and is perpetually restoring his Highland Park home. He is the author of Los Angeles Neon. His forthcoming projects include a book on the American mortuary and something involving all those postcards he's collected. This must have been written by Nathan, I think a couple of years ago, probably, right?
A long time ago. We'll see what happens to the mortuary book. I don't know.
Here's another one. Nathan Marsak is a Los Angeles dilettante. His fetishes are many, but mostly involve arcana of our vanished built environment. He has contributed to the On Bunker Hill and 1947 project blogs and is the author of Los Angeles Neon. He hosts an occasional bus tour, which I'm sure you do with Epicurious. Not Epicurious, what am I talking about?
I don't know. Epicurious, but it's esoteric. It's like
esoteric, right? No, right. Esoteric tours. He hosts an occasional bus tour, and he owns an unnatural number of neckties, one of which he's wearing tonight.
That's true.
Nathan is also a Lava Visionary of the Year recipient. Anyways, shall we begin, Nathan?
Shall we? I'm ready anytime. So is everyone out there ready?
Everyone's here. We got a bunch of people. We have 45 people.
I feel a little bit like I'm one of you in that when I bought my rather grand Tudor in Highland Park 20 some years ago, and I would tell people, now no one knew where Highland Park was 20 some years ago, and I'd say, well, I bought this grand. They'd say, well, of course you bought a grand Tudor. You're Nathan. Are you like closer to the country club, or are you down near Wilshire? And I'd say, no, not Hancock Park, Highland Park. And they'd say, where the hell is that? And I'd say, oh, well, you know, that weird road with the exits that are 5 miles an hour, like up there.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, we thought you were in Hancock Park. So in a small way, I'm Hancock Park, not adjacent, but metaphysically. So let's see if we can do this. I press that, and then I press that, and then I press that. Whoops, and we're on. How does it look?
Looks good.
That's what I like to hear. So,
yeah, looks good.
Bunker Hill, Los Angeles, which I might add is a recently published book from Angel City Press, Titans of Los Angeles Publishing. 176 pages, hardback, 250 plus images, many never before seen, many in color. So if you need something to sit down and read when you're not sitting around on your computer watching Zoom presentations, I recommend Bunker Hill, Los Angeles from Angel City Press. And in the meantime, to whet your whistle before you buy the book, let's talk about Bunker Hill. So in broad strokes, let's see what happens if I do this. It works. So Bunker Hill, the famous first suburb of Los Angeles that sort of started out as this haven of rectitude. You know, you see it up there, that's the Bradbury Mansion up there at First and at Court and Hill Street, and then descended into this den of decrepitude. So the common narrative being, if you know, the LA Times at the in the 1950s would go on about, you know, you'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy, with all of its hopheads and grifters and slatterns. And that was until the bankers came, the banksters, you know, the cabal of bloated plutocrats with their top hats and monocles, and they tore it all down. You know, the Mike Davis camp would have you believe that. But here's the truth. As is the truth with so many stories that you've been told, the streetcar conspiracy, Chavez Ravine, the truth is the opposite is actually true. By all actual and primary accounts, Bunker Hill, not really so much a den of decrepitude as much as it was a pretty nice place. And it wasn't greedy corporate fat cats. It wasn't a cabal of bankers and money men that tore the place down. It was your vaunted government that did that with all their best intentions, God bless them. It was City Hall, City Council, the Community Redevelopment Agency with federal money that kicked out all those poor folk. Let there be light. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story you're going to hear tonight. Lots of pictures, so it's fun. First thing you do, always, is define our boundaries. Now, we talk about Bunker Hill. You might be thinking, the hell is that? Well, just west of the plaza, the burgeoning Bunker Hill, what we're talking about really is Hill Street to the east, because no one's ever carved in stone, where's Bunker Hill? I like to think of it as Hill Street to the east, 5th Street to the south, that's Figueroa to the west, and Sunset all the way to the north. Now, the area between Temple and Sunset is often thought of as Fort Moore Hill. I like to think of that as the northern part of Bunker Hill. The particularities and intricacies of Fort Moore Hill as part of Bunker Hill is covered quite a bit in the book. So we're just going to keep that as our introduction to Fort Moore Hill, which I believe our next slide is taken from the aforementioned Fort Moore Hill, looking down Broadway, looking down Fort Street at the time. And then you see that big hill looming up there on the upper right. That's, well, that wasn't Bunker Hill at the time. At the time, it was just called, you know, that hill. They would say, what's that hill over there? They'd say, there's that hill. They'd say, es una gran loma over there. Until up rode a great man, this crazy French Canadian, as us crazy French Canadians tend to be, named Prudent Beaudry. And he shows up in the 1850s. And in 1867, he bought that dry, worthless land with an eye towards subdivision. And so, let's see if we can go back. So you see the spine the top of that hill, that was to become what was known as Bunker Hill Avenue. And what would become at the top of that hill? Well, look at the top, look at this bottom picture. Look at the top of that. That's the famous, the Rose Mansion on the very far left at 4th and Grand, and then across the way there with the pointed cupola, that's the Brunson Mansion. And then all the way on the end there at 3rd and Olive was the Crocker Mansion. We're going to go into all these houses in more detail a little bit later. Because what Beaudry did is he had to work out the rigmarole. They said, if we can get water up there, we're going to make a fortune subdividing. And lo and behold, he got water up there. There's a whole story about that with, Solomon Lazar and pumping from the reservoirs and stuff like that. And lo, did we make the desert bloom. So we're going to talk a lot in this talk tonight about architecture because I love architecture. So I'm going to force you to listen to architecture. The first structures, by and large, after the subdivision went in were Italianate and folk Victorian. Here we see a bit of folk Victorian with a nod towards the Gothic revival. Friedrich Wilhelm Spar was a Prussian carpenter. He was 60 years old when he built that house himself, which is pretty cool, on South Bunker Hill Avenue. It's one of the first houses to go in. Down here we see, the sort of classic folk Victorian houses, gable, side wing, and a little bit of lovely little gingerbread along the porches. And this is what you start seeing in early Bunker Hill, a lot of that folk Victorian Gothic revival with a lovely nod to Andrew Jackson Downing, Alexander Jackson Davis. And then in that same sort of Downing era, there's a lot of Italianate. The Potts Mansion, which is where the Bradbury Mansion would be built. The Potts Mansion is that classic Italianate, hipped roof, bracketed eaves, tall pedimented windows. There was even a bit of the mansard style, a style really more suited to the 1870s when it was intended to connote the progressive values of Second Empire France, but which had very much fallen out of fashion by the mid-1880s. And mansard roofs were very, very common in Los Angeles in the 1870s, as remember, most of its important citizens of early Los Angeles were, naturally, as we know, French. And in that same vein, there was quite a bit of the Chateauesque. And one of the great Chateauesque homes was up here. This is built by Myra Hershey, who you might have heard of, Hershey Hall and stuff like that. The greatest Chateauesque house in the Southland is in Redlands, it's called. Cornelia Hill built it. What do they call it? Kimberly Crest. And you go to Kimberly Crest and they'll tell you that, like, oh, Cornelia Hill went to the Loire Valley and she saw the castles and she said, I want a house that looks like this. That is poppycock. What happened was, no one will tell you this over there, but this is true. She saw Elmira Hershey's house and she said, who's your architect? And she said, it's Oliver Perry Dennis. She said, I want a house like that. And that's how Kimberly Crest got built, because Hershey had gone to Bunker Hill and seen this cool house. And so with the pinnacles and the spires and the candle snuffer towers and all the cresting and the finials and stuff like that. So that's sort of and this is a little later house, 1896, but so I've sort of been showing you with the mansard and the Italianate and the folk Victorian and the Gothic revival, the sort of early and pre-boom architecture on the hill. But the architecture that Bunker Hill will really be known for forever and ever is always going to be Queen Anne, and which we go into, ad nauseum in the book, because Queen Anne is just so important. And so remember, in 1869, we connected to the harbor by rail, and in 1876, we connected to the rest of the country, transatlantic. And that was the great and famous land boom of 1885 with which we were all familiar, when the colonists settled the land, and you could famously get a ticket from Kansas for $1. And so there was this big influx of people, and there's this confluence of events between the Queen Anne, which stemmed mostly from, the 1876 fair, and people flooding in. And then, so, the lumpen proletariat are filling in the city, and the hoity-toity want to get away from the hoi polloi, and they rise above the effluvia and the miasma of the city, and they start building these great Queen Anne homes. And even though these look very quaint to us, especially with the sort of multiplicity of historicizing design sources, these were in fact very modern homes. This was the Industrial Revolution at its best. The balloon frame system was a new type of construction that was due absolutely completely to the machine-made nail, which was very new, which allowed for a sort of structural expressivity. This is the sort of willful irregularity you see in these wonderful houses. The flexible and formal interiors was an absolutely new way of domestic living that sort of blew apart the old sort of staid, sort of stolid types of housings and the way people lived before that. These houses were noted for the abjuration of old-fashioned formal interiors, and modern glass production allowed for more natural light and fresh air. People were very much about fresh air in these days. Look at all this wonderful sleeping porches and these towers. The flush toilets, pressurized gas, these were all hooked up to sewer systems. I mean, these are very, very modern way of life. And we always talked about, oh, and these are also hand built and the handcraft. But remember, these were in effect all machine made because they were straight out of the jigsaw. And they're all, you know, gas fired and electric jigsaws. They were pumping out tons of all this gingerbread. So let's look at some of the great Queen Anne houses that we so commonly equate with the glory of boom era Bunker Hill. Oh, and I want to point out something too. People will talk about Nob Hill versus Bunker Hill. Nob Hill, the famous area of San Francisco, which is all mostly gone now because of the fire of 1906, but Nob Hill was bigger, it was better, it was first. But here's just something, for example, we just saw, the Rose Mansion, one of the greats. When William Crocker up on Nob Hill wanted his house built, California and Jones, he looked to Curlett, Eisen, and Cuthbertson, our guys, and said, I want a house like that, says William Crocker, and builds an almost exactly identical house. So again, like Kimberly Crest in Redlands copying Bunker Hill, here's a Nob Hill guy copying Bunker Hill. I mean, we never had anything quite as crazy as like the Mark Hopkins mansion, which predated a lot of the Bunker Hill stuff, but at least we got proof of one of the Crockers copying Bunker Hill. So, Nob Hill, I say. Speaking of the Crockers, when we talk about the big four, which was, Leland Stanford and Huntington and Hopkins and Crocker, there was really big five. Big four is sort of a misnomer, is really big five because there were two Crockers. The other Crocker being Edwin Crocker. And this was Margaret Rhodes Crocker's house. She was the ex-wife of Edwin Crocker, who had passed. And so she had houses all over the place. So she comes to Los Angeles and builds this one. This is one of the most famous houses of Bunker Hill because it's seen in all the early images of Angel's Flight. Just to the south of it, they had built Angel's Flight, which she built in 1886. Great giant Queen Anne pile of a place. Probably taking the title of most famous house on Bunker Hill away from the Crocker Mansion would be the Bradbury Mansion, which everybody knows as the great Louis Leonard Bradbury, who built the Bradbury Building. That's one of the things I'm always asked, does the Bradbury Building have any relation to the famous Bradbury Mansion up on this? Absolutely yes. He got to watch the Bradbury Building being built from his house, but he never saw it finished because he died. But Simona Martinez, she got to live in this house until she passed around 1901. And then this was torn down in early 1929 for a parking lot, but this is by the Newsomes. The Newsomes, who were, as we know, I won't go into it or we'll be here all night, but super important and very prolific on the hill. The castle is one of the greats, probably on Bunker Hill Avenue, probably best known as one of the two houses that were moved to Heritage Square. One of the questions I'm frequently asked is, or not even asked, but I'm just told, yeah, but a lot of these houses were moved and you can go visit them now at that place, that used car lot of old houses up, when you were going up the 110, it's in like Montecito Heights. No, I mean, yes, but no, because two houses were moved, the castle and the salt box. They were moved in March of 1969 and then burned by Manson family rejects in October of 1969. So this great house no longer exists, but a bunch of great houses still do exist at Heritage Square, mostly from Boyle Heights, Highland Park, places like that. So this is the great castle. And another typical one, Mark William Connor's Melrose, which was a residence hotel. That is to say, he built it as his own residence, lived in a good bit of it, but also built a large sort of apartment hotel, and then as part of it, and then just to the south of that is the Richelieu, which is likely by Bradbury and Ferris, which is the same sort of deal that was built by the Larkins family in 1888. So you see these wonderful buildings. And then, so you're saying that's all fine and good, but then how long did they build these for, and where did they all go, and why did they stop building like that? And I'll tell you why. Because, well, two things. Just as there was a real estate boom, with every boom comes what? A bust. And people stopped building after 1888, and the Queen Anne died out. The 1890s were a time of financial downturn. There was a very famous crash in 1893. There was a crash in 93, and there was a panic in 96. And by the time people started building again, by about 1901, 1902, the American visual cues, the American visual language had changed completely, and largely due to the 1893 World Columbian Exposition. It changed people's eyes, the way they looked at the world. That was all now going to be less with these crazy asymmetrical facades, and now it was all about bilateral symmetry, neoclassical forms, columns, and pediments as rich and white and ornamented as a congregation of royal brides. And we cannot underestimate the tastemakers of the day. They were like the sort of Instagram influencers of the day. They were Edward Bok, who was the editor of Ladies' Home Journal, unfathomably important, and he railed against the frippery of Pullman cars, and said it was in low taste, bad taste, dreadful stuff. Edith Wharton was on his side. She railed against bad taste, and so did Elsie de Wolfe, our first interior decorator. And so when it came time to start building again, how did we build? This is a very archetypal example. This is a Joseph Catherine Newsom house from 1888, 333 South Grand. It was built for Eldon P. Bryan, who sells it. It's torn down and is replaced by this Frederick Rice Dorn. It's called the Fleur de Lis apartment hotel, known as a family hotel. But look at the like absolute bilateral symmetry here, and this wonderful, heavily corbelled pediment, and the captain's walk and the Ionic columns. That was the new visual language of Bunker Hill. Colonial Flats, another Frederick Rice Dorn, made all the more colonial with the captain's walk balustrade, sort of connotes the New England homes with a view of the sea. This is one you actually know. This is one you've probably actually seen. You don't think so right now, but let me tell you. The 4 bays on this side here were demolished in 1914. This is the upper terminus of Angel's Flight. So that the 2 bays on this side, well, maybe the way you're watching is maybe this side. But anyway, but they're painted orange now. The way this should actually be is bright white. The way neoclassical architecture of this sort of Beaux-Arts variety should be bright white. But because we know Angel's Flight is being painted orange as it was in about 1925, we're going to leave it orange. We like it that way. More classic Greek revival, Beaux-Arts style, lots of Corinthian columns everywhere. Classic 1905 to 1909. By about 1907, 1909, Bunker Hill was pretty much built out. And people had started moving west in their inexorable march to the sea. Oh, and look at what Charles O. Ellis has done here. He's castellated the roof line of the Lovejoy, which is Beaux-Arts. It's all festooned, swag and garland and pedimented. But he's also crenellated the parapet of the Granada, which has the hallmarks of the Mission vernacular. Stucco walls, the arcade, which brings us to the Mission style, another one of the great styles on Bunker Hill. And the Mission style existed on the Hill. It was deemed a proper expression for California. It had also been popularized at the 1893 Columbian Exposition. What was it, the A. Brown California building? Huge hit, lines around the block. In using this style, we were saying that Southern California is picturesque. It is unique. Remember, the Mission style was sort of the first style to start in the West and spread east instead of the other way around, instead of us taking other styles. The Fremont Hotel was the first and the greatest of the Mission hotels on the Hill. John C. Austin, from Griffith Observatory, Hollywood Masonic Temple, Shrine Auditorium, City Hall. I know you're thinking, no, City Hall is John Parkinson. Well, John C. Austin had a huge hand in it. The Hall of Justice when he was working with Allied Architects. The Mun by Arthur Haley. Arthur Haley, sort of forgotten now, but Arthur Haley built probably 200 apartment buildings across Los Angeles back in the day, including these mission style on Bunker Hill. And the great Joseph Catherine Newsom, whom we don't commonly associate or equate with working in the mission style, working in the great mission style. Look at the Twin Towers, red tile roofs, arcades. I mean, just fantastic stuff. And I love the way it's paired. If you look just behind it, there's a classic, like, snuffer towered Victorian home. And now let's think a little bit about Bunker Noir, Noir on the Hill. We tend to equate the Hill with grifters and grime. And this has its genesis in noir authors and filmmakers who made use of the Hill because it was partially peopled by the poor and disenfranchised. Here, by the way, we see the benches at the end of Third Street where they dead-ended Bunker Hill Avenue. This is not an actual crime scene photo. This is when they were filming the motion picture Angel's Flight. So these guys are fake cops studying a script, and this guy is, laying there hamming it up. So the acorn that grew the mighty noir oak, if you will, were the hard-boiled authors. Don Ryan, who wrote Angel's Flight in 1927. Paul Kane wrote Fast One, published in 1932. And of course, you can't mention Old LA without mentioning who? Raymond Chandler. It's all about Raymond Chandler. High Window, King in Yellow, and this is a typical quote, is with coffee and cigarettes and Angel's Flight. I paired this with this image from one of the negatives out of one of my binders of just like a moody Angel's Flight in the rain, guy with his hat pulled down. There's just so many wonderful Chandler quotes about Old Bunker Hill. You can read them all in Bunker Hill, Los Angeles, available to your local bookseller. And then, of course, there are the noir pictures. Film noir could achieve a gritty verisimilitude that reflected, the whole bleak post-war disillusionment, which you couldn't get on a back lot. Sometimes you'll see these film noirs and they'll shoot a little bit on location and then a little bit on a back lot, and it's so jarring. And that's why you had these European directors. They come over, they got these new smaller cameras. They can go out shooting especially on a place like Bunker Hill, where they didn't even need permits a lot of the time. And because, all the old folks would look the other way. They're like, you don't bother us, we won't bother you. Robert Aldrich could go shoot Kiss Me Deadly. Robert Siodmak, Crisscross. That is Yvonne De Carlo. Now, Yvonne De Carlo, you may know, is Lily Munster from the Munsters. Yes, so it's Lily Munster smoking while Angel's Flight is crossing behind her. That's the sexiest moment in cinema history, ladies and gentlemen. And I know a thing or two about cinema history, so I can tell you that. Fred Zinnemann filmed Van Heflin's descent into the hellish bowels of Los Angeles, an act of violence. Dick Powell in Cry Danger. These are just some representative samplings. I'm sure we could talk all night about the representation of Old LA, Old Bunker Hill in film noir. I think there's a couple of films that Richard has linked to, including a 1948 process shot from Shockproof that you can go watch tonight. That's on YouTube. And there was some actual, I'd mentioned earlier, remember that Bunker Hill was in all actuality a pretty nice place, but there were some parts of it that were a little bit dicey. 3rd Street was an area that was a little dark. The Los Angeles Times referred to it as a secondary Skid Row. It was no stranger to cheap rooms and liquor stores, and look at that neon sign that says chop suey, like chop suey joints and dive bars, pawn shops, the works. Especially, well, this part where that tunnel is, that's the west end of the 3rd Street tunnel at Hope Street. So from Hope Street to Figueroa along 3rd Street, gets a little low rent there. The bottom photo is 3rd Street from Olive, like going up to Bunker Hill Avenue. It's a little nicer there, but then, cream rises to the top. But it's still got a little sketchy. I recount a few of the more noir crimes that occurred on Bunker Hill in this, but here's just one that I want to toss out there. This is when Harriet Allen had been married just 8 days to her new husband, Robert, and old flame Bruce showed up on a Sunday morning and gunned her down, and then he had one bullet left and turned it on himself. And I bring this up especially because John Fonte, whom you may know, he's the famous author who wrote Ask the Dust, arguably the greatest quintessential book about Los Angeles, moved into the Alta Vista, which he renamed the Alta Loma and Ask the Dust, about 2 months after this occurred. So there you go. Reality all mixed together. Cool stuff. Hill Street was another part that got really dicey. And you can still go there today. That's Grand Central Market. Otto Stephen Wilson, where it says 2 women brutally slain. He's one of our favorite cannibal necrophiles of all LA. If you have a favorite, I mean, there's so many to choose from. Where he killed 2 women in 1944, where it says murder bear by bar conversation. That's Guy Anthony Manella when he strangled Arturo Macias. An AWOL soldier named Frank Kubarek strangled Marie Wallace in 1950 in the New Palace Cafe. That building is actually still there. It got cut down to 1 story. It's now where the La Chita bar is. And it was built in 1895. And that's like a Victorian building right there in downtown. Very few of those left. The 2 buildings between that and Grand Central Market, which were amazing, were torn down by Ira Yellen in 1988, which broke everyone's heart, but that's Clay Street, which was really more of an alley. It was only about 27 feet wide. When photos of Los Angeles's drinking class emerge, they're usually on Clay Street. Right there, 338 Clay is where, if you're familiar with the film The Exiles, probably some of you are if you like your old LA films. It was a 1962 film made by 61, made by Kent McKenzie, and Homer and Yvonne lived there. And also in the 1955 film noir Finger Man, a delightfully unhinged Timothy Carey like gets beat up right under those stairs. But what was Bunker Hill really like? I mean, I'm showing you all this noir stuff and all these terrible things that happen. But I'm going to contrast that now, because I'm going to say it was actually peaceful. It was a respite above the city. You talk to people who were there, and they described the cooing of the pigeons and the sound of, opera emanating from a window and the smell of the flowers from unkempt gardens. I mean, yes, okay, it's like flowers have to compete with the smell of steaks frying, but it was a nice, it was a vibrant, functional little neighborhood. It was the kind of neighborhood that new urbanists attempt to engineer today, because it had walkability, it had mixed use. What I've done in putting these photos together is just try to give you an idea of like what you would do. You're an older person, you're living on Bunker Hill. There on the upper, was it left, makes the L, upper left, you'd ride Angel's Flight up from Grand Central Market. You've got some stew meat. There you are, lower left, you're coming from Angel's Flight. You're going to walk down 3rd Street to your apartment at the Alta Vista, whatever, or at 3rd and Bunker Hill Avenue. You walk down the 500 block of West 3rd Street. What do you got? You got Varney Shoe Repair, you got a liquor store, you got the Chinese Laundry, you got the radio repair place. You got everything you need. You got these little zones of attraction. Was it Joan Didion always talked about like zones of attraction and zones of repulsion? It's all zones of attraction. And then you sit with your buddy, Shaky Joe, and you sit at Angel's Flight Pharmacy and you read the newspaper in the 1950s, and it says, Soviet space program ahead in dog killing race, or whatever it says in the 1950s newspaper. And that's what life is like. It was by and large peopled by, I mean, you read Chandler, and Chandler will tell you that it's all men in pulled down hats and women with faces like stale beer and all these Chandlerian things. But it was pensioners. It was what we might term, you don't hear the term pensioners much anymore, but what we might term the elderly urban poor. Boom. That's what they looked like. Walking around with their bags of stuff and their canes and sitting on the porch and petting cats. And there's a wonderful shot. There's a wonderful painting done by Leo Politi in his book of Rose the cat lady petting her cat. And it only existed as this, this little watercolor, and it didn't have as much life until I actually then found an image of Rose the cat lady actually petting her cat. And I went, oh my God, it all comes together. And then I started talking to people like Gordon Pattison, who lived on Bunker Hill back in the day, and he'll tell you, yeah, it was just these pensioners, and they wanted to be left alone until the city came knocking on them. Bunker Hill began to gentrify. Something else people don't tell you. The hill dress became known as the Hope Crest when the Haufa family came and said, we are going to restore the heck out of this place, and did. A bunch of people who worked at the Times, a bunch of people who worked at burgeoning KCET said, wow, we can like live like right on this hill and have these amazing views and live for cheap and fix up these old places. Developers started like fixing up places, and some of these all started to gentrify, but you know, it had already started, the wheels were in motion. The city was going to tear it all down, but I'll get into that in a little bit. People will tell you that every house on the hill was falling apart and was beyond reclamation. And there was nothing modern built on the hill. What about 144 South Grand? Look at that. Look at those corner windows. Look at that international modern. What about the Bunker Hill Recreation Center by William Lee Willett, AIA? You know, a photographer like Leonard Nadell, who worked for the city, who worked for the Community Redevelopment Agency to shoot shoeless children. They're supposed to look like these soot-covered Dickensian street urchins. He would always shoot them next to like trash incinerators. Most of the kids were playing at the Bunker Hill Recreation Center all day long. They don't tell you that. There was modern stuff like State Office Building, that still exists. Kenny and Cohn's legal offices, if you've heard of the Hollywood 10, you know, who were blacklisted, famous Hollywood 10 case, all their briefs were prepared here. This one actually survived. It was picked up and moved down Beverly. There was even a Googie's. The style was given its name by this chain, famous with all that ebullient signage and whatnot. This was at 5th and Olive in the San Carlos Hotel. And there was even this crazy character. His name was Stuart K. Oliver. He lived downtown. He worked at the Mitsubishi Corporation. He was a chemist. And he said, I'm going to build like a super modern house right up on Bunker Hill because it's the best place in the world to live. And he did. So I'm showing you all this and you're like, well, it's all at the bottom of a landfill now. What became of it? Well, it all goes back to wiping out slums and the New Deal. And Mayor Shaw, who was a Republican, but he was a staunch New Dealer, goes, what does it say here? Is a widened understanding of the needs and problems of the underprivileged in the city's population. And the idea was, we start wiping out slums and we're going to get us out of this depression by building. That's the Roosevelt idea, you know, get rid of the Keynesian model. Anyway, United States Housing Authority, Catherine Bauer, she actually went to Russia and said, like, how do they do it in Russia? And came back and said, I have an idea. We're going to put everyone in these big, you know, concrete high rises. And that's what we started doing. So here's Fletcher Bauer, a little while later. He's saying something radical, bold, new, progressive. A new park and other improvements on Bunker Hill. Well, it's after the war. It's 1945. The California legislature, at the behest of the labor unions and housing lobbyists, enacted the Community Redevelopment Act, which strengthened eminent domain, which means they take your home to build projects. They say, knock, knock, get out, taking your home, build projects. And in 1948, 3 years later, Mayor Fletcher Bauer, pictured here, therefrom installed the Community Redevelopment Agency. Bunker Hill became project area #1, despite there being much worse areas in the city, many worse areas of the city. But the problem with Bunker Hill was it was right under the nose of City Hall, and they didn't like that. So there was so let's look at, see, there's a great picture in the book, by the way, of this model in color. It took me 3 years to get that picture. Okay. The 1949 Housing Act, Truman had a fair deal, you know, Roosevelt had the New Deal, Truman had the fair deal. So there's a 1949 Housing Act after Fletcher Bauer has the CRA developed in 1948. And the act worked akin to previous acts in that it empowered government to seize by eminent domain so they could build projects, build public housing. But what made Truman's act different was its Title I. And Title I uncoupled the taking of private property with the building of public housing. Now you still had to replace one for one, but you didn't have to do it in the same place. So under his act, you buy up and tear down and regrade Bunker Hill and sell it to the highest bidder if the new tax structure benefits government. Well, so what we did therefore is we went from pure social engineering to a societal restructuring. It's a minor change, but an interesting one. And this is straight out of the playbook of 1940s progressive social campaigner and economist Irving Fisher, who spoke of highest and best use. He wouldn't shut up about it. Highest and best use all day long. That's all he talked about. So ultimately, the issue with Bunker Hill was that it cost more in city services, police, fire, health, than it generated in taxes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what doomed Bunker Hill. Well, because Bunker Hill was now therefore doomed, here's the mayor looking at some Pereira and Luckman plans with the CRA chief, and he's saying like, look, this is where we're gonna like put these high rises. And the mayor's like, okay. And so the wheels are in motion. They apply for, you know, $55 million in federal aid to start tearing down everything. And then they just got to start pushing it. And in fact, they put it before the voters in 1951, Proposition C, and the voters shot it down. So Bunker Hill was saved. The CRA was over. And then the city said, oh, we shouldn't have put it before the voters. That was a mistake. So they decided to do some tax increment financing and just did it anyway. And then they just had to keep pushing it in the press. And it's really interesting to read the way they would sort of humanize it and feminize it. There's this about how it's invaded by poverty and filth. And I really thought that this part was interesting about how, yes, she has the forlorn, rundown look of a dowager who has lost her fortune, lost her figure and her self-respect. And then down here it talks about the girl who says it's always been a wart on the city's nose. And then by 1966, they're just, you know, gone, hitting it hard. Just it's filthy and reeking. It's full of drifters and dope peddlers and prostitutes, and worse yet, poor families looking for a cheap place to stay. Oh, the horror. I'm clutching my pearls. So I want to take a couple of minutes to sort of talk about the way we regarded Victorian architecture in the 20th century, and the way we came to understand the type of architecture that existed in Bunker Hill. Because anything Victorian took on an increasingly unsavory air over time. Is more than just connoting bad taste. Remember when I talked to you about like Edith Wharton and Edward Bach, and it was like, oh, the fripperies and bad taste. It was more than that. It was that, you know, the polygonal towers and the stained glass represented a bloated, corrupt, death-obsessed time. The progressive era, say beginning about 1896 through like 1916, but especially after World War I, was seen as vile and corrupt. Think about how, like, you're a World War I vet or family of a vet who's dead or limbless, and disillusioned veterans didn't see all the technological utopianism of the Gilded Age as all fine and good. The cost of technological and economical advancement was dirty factories and poorly made mass-produced goods. So you start seeing the representations. Charles Burkfield's, this is my favorite painting in the whole world. Look at the red, scary door. House of Mystery sort of has this unease and anxiety in it. Was it Jack Morgan talks about it, it's wrong geometry. And then Edward Hopper's House by the Railroad, a very famous painting that sort of inculcates this feeling of ominous, inhuman, desolate Victorianism. We now equate, especially these mansard towers, with this sort of inhuman time. That's how they really came to think of the Gilded Age. Look at Old Homes Made New from 1878. What it's telling you is you take your very plain, hip-roofed, bilateral house and futchki it up with the very au courant Queen Anne gigas and doodads. And exactly 50 years later in House and Garden in 1928, they're telling you, like, look at all your, you know, your gables with these lovely decorated truss work and the dead trees out front. But now the trees are alive because you've stripped all that off and we're going to de-Victorianize your house. You know, it's like how to de-Victorianize your house in 6 easy steps. Like that's where we were going in the 1920s. Oh, and then of course, you know, and you start seeing in like books like Cadaver of Gideon Wick. I was talking about like this is the monument to the most tasteless period of American Victorianism. Nothing could be done about the house without raising it and building anew. That's how they felt about the Victorian age. And then it gets to the point where they sort of ease out of it, becoming a little more comic. I know it says, I know that the image is from the movie, which is 1944, to the place from 1941, and it's very specific about it being in a Victorian. It came to the point where Victorians are only good for like old ladies who live in these houses where they have cellars. Like, for example, your ranch house in Encino or whatever doesn't have a cellar, but where people have cellars and gingerbread on their houses, I don't know if you're familiar with the tale, but yes, basically crazy old ladies live in these houses like on Bunker Hill. And what do? They poison people, like lots of people, like dozens of people. That's what these houses are doing. They're full of crazy old lady poisoners. So look out, don't go near them. Because this is the sort of people that live in them. Look at the cover of the New Yorker. The cover of the New Yorker is like, oh, look at this beautiful like house and all this lovely Christmas loveliness. And this is an actual Charles Adams image from inside that very Christmas New Yorker. If you have a mansard tower, you're likely going to have boiling oil poured on you. That's the kind of creepy people who live in these things. And this is the sort of, the cultural zeitgeist. That's how we were considering these houses. The most famous one, arguably, being, I know you're thinking, no, it's supposed to say Norman Bates. You left out the end, but no, this is the home of Norma Bates. Norma Bates was Norman's mother. Aha. Probably the most famous of all these houses. Again, you go near these houses, if it has an oriel window in the mansard tower, you're likely going to be murdered. More famous spooky houses, even worse than the fact that, monsters live there. They have, their skin is a different color. Oh, your neighbors have, well, green, but and the Adams house, which was in fact down on, wasn't it, like Chester Place. But then they, in the image there, of course, they, at least you don't call it green screen. They painted in matte painting. So these became the homes of like literal monsters. It was just played for comic effect at that point, up to and including like an actual Bunker Hill. Well, the Rochester apartments are often spoken in the same breath as Bunker Hill. It was sort of Bunker Hill adjacent. It was sort of part of the Temple Beaudry area. But yeah, so the second season of Scooby-Doo, straight out of there. And to this day, we still use, Mystic Manor in Disneyland, Hong Kong is based loosely on a Newsom house, sort of vaguely like the Bradbury Mansion. And of course, Phantom Manor in Euro Disney Paris is the Norma Bates house. So there you go. These still connote, monsters and horror and unease. Although, now today, a place like Angelino Heights, we have a begrudging respect for them. Although I do know some people in Angelino Heights who are likely to poison you, so watch out. So to get back to the pure history of it all, of what happened to Bunker Hill. I know we're running a little long, but we're getting there. The CRA goes to the city and says, what you need to do is approve this and we'll go to town. And it took them 10 years because people kept trying to fight it and saying like, this is absurd. In fact, when it was finally approved by the city council, see, it says 12-2 vote, okay. The two council members who voted against it were the most conservative and the most liberal. Interestingly, John Holland, who was a right-winger, who said, this is the most un-American thing I've ever heard of. You can't take people's houses. That's what they do in Russia. And the most left-winger, who was Roy Ball, you've all heard of Roy Ball because everything's named after Roy Ball. And he said, you can't do this. This is absurd. You're not giving people this is a $60 million project. You're giving each person like $25 to move out. This is unconscionable. But still it got passed. And in September 1961, if you were in the bulldozer business, like your kids got braces and they all went to college. I mean, you were doing just fine. It was a golden age for demolition. I did want to point out that when we talk about the demolition of Bunker Hill, there's sort of like two aspects to it. There's the famous, usually people talking about the CRA and the famous 136 acre, 9,000 person demolition from 1949. It started in 1961, passed in 1959, etc. But everything north of First, that was from First down to Fifth and Hill to Figueroa, basically. There's some little chunks taken out here and there. But everything north of First, that was all county. And no one ever talks about the 2,500 people that the City Housing Authority, via the county, tore out of their homes from like 1949, 50 and tossed out somewhere. And those people were mostly, unlike the white pensioners from the CRA, those people were mostly Hispanic, mostly people of color, just by chance. And they're sort of lost to history. I think there's some really interesting tales there. And I think one of the reasons we don't talk about them as much is because people tend to like these buildings. Not the courthouse and the Hall of Administration, which I love, but people don't like those buildings. But people tend to like the Music Center and the Department of Water and Power, which is now a historic cultural monument. So you hear a lot less griping about the fact that all those people were torn from their homes and tossed out by the county. But let's go back across First Street, south of First Street, and talk about the CRA plans. So the CRA tears everything down and take out all the little streets like Cinnabar Street and Clay Street and Bunker Hill Avenue. And then they put together these super blocks and they say, super blocks for sale. And it's just crickets. Nobody wants these things. And they go, oh, crap. But then about 4 years go by and Connecticut Life Insurance comes up and says like, well, you know, we like this one way on the very corner here, Fifth and Figueroa. And up goes Union Bank. And that, which interestingly enough, is our first Bunker Hill high-rise made into a historic cultural monument, recently so. With the Garrett Ekbo Gardens, if you've never been, go take a look, it's magnificent. And so little by little, the new Bunker Hill, the redevelopment Bunker Hill Towers is next to go in. That's, if some of you may be familiar, the guy pointing there is, so we got Robert Alexander there as the architect and Z. Wayne Griffin, who is CRA administrator, and that Smiling Sam, that's Sam Yorty there. He's digging it. You'll notice that he's pointing at one of the two towers that wasn't built because they had really terrible occupancy in these things when they were first built. And so bing, bang, boom, you know, we started building up Bunker Hill through the 70s, especially the famous Security Pacific Bank, which has an amazingly intact lobby, and you know, the Calder and the terrific gardens. There's the Bonaventure Hotel, which has probably the most sublime interior space in America. And the Crocker Bank building, which has this atrium designed by Lawrence Halprin, which is just unbelievably gorgeous, which is then demolished in 2017. And so it's a little bit ironic that we mourn the loss of Bunker Hill, old Victorian and Edwardian Bunker Hill, demolished, replaced by this. And now we have to go through the hard work of worrying about post-redevelopment Bunker Hill, some of it which is now becoming historic cultural monuments, because now they're starting to demolish that. These buildings are now, you know, especially stuff like the Courthouse and Hall of Administration, which are now 60 years old, they're now the same age as old Bunker Hill was in the 60s when they were being torn down. So when we see stuff like the atrium being torn down and the music centers having its plaza filled in, the Hall of Administration and the courthouse by Stanton and Stockwell, Adrian Wilson, and Paul Williams, the great African-American architect who ACP just did an amazing book on, the county is very hot to tear those down and build high-rises. Not on my watch. Those are great late modern buildings and they're terrific. So what is the future Bunker Hill? Whither Bunker Hill? Well, being finished right now, of course, is the Frank Gehry Grand Avenue project. I believe they are topping out on March 15th. Topping out means putting, you know, the final beam on. And then the image at your lower right is the Shenzhen Tower, which is intended to be the tallest building between Chicago and Hong Kong at 333 South Figueroa. That's the old, not old, it's the 1983 Starkman Sheraton Grand. And so they're going to demolish the sort of forecourt area and build the tallest tower in LA, certainly. And the question is if you want to talk Bunker Noir, it may not get built because the developers gave Councilman Jose Huizar $600,000 so Huizar could pay off staffers that he'd been, sexually harassing. And then after the FBI probe, the developer Shenzhen has since pled guilty to racketeering and bribery in exchange for the approval to build this tower. And that is the real LA Noir, is the venal councilmen and their Department of Justice indictments, which include money laundering and tax evasion and conspiracy and bribery and racketeering. So again, I ask, whither are we bound? Bunker Hill. And I want to thank you all very much for your attention to my little presentation. Again, if you have any further questions, please ask them, but really it's all expanded in great detail, especially right there. Look at that in the book. Thank you very much. And now I do that. And,
Wow, that was great.
thank you. My pleasure.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that was really good. Really. I want to see that movie Kiss Me Deadly. There's a guy on Turner Classic that does the noir films, and I think that was one of the ones he highlighted, but I have to watch it again. YouTube has a lot of these wonderful old films on there.
Oh, yeah. A lot of them have fallen into public domain. If there's one sort of LA noir you should see, I would say Kiss Me Deadly is probably it. It has some great stuff. It's got great stuff like, at one point, Mike Hammer helps this old guy like carry a package into like a big box into the castle up on Bunker Hill Avenue, and there's great shots inside of it. Just marvelous picture. Cloris Leachman's in it.
You forgot the most recent reference to Bunker Hill in entertainment, which is
Perry Mason.
Perry Mason. You should have a shot from Perry Mason in your.
I really should. Perry Mason, if people haven't seen it, is not only, I think, an incredible piece of art, just, I don't know, for its whatever diegetic structure, but the Bunker Hill stuff, wow. I mean, you look at something like when Robert Towne, who did Chinatown, finally did Ask the Dust, and he like tried to recreate Bunker Hill, and he did like the weirdest stuff I've ever seen. I was like, what the hell are you doing? The Perry Mason stuff is spot on, and the, I don't know, CGI or whatever they did, wow, incredible. You really feel like you're right there.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So questions from the audience?
Shoot, let me hear them.
You have to, if you want to ask a question, you have to remember to unmute yourself.
They're in the chat.
Oh, there we go.
They're in the chat.
All right. If you haven't seen it, Los Angeles Plays Itself by Tom Anderson goes over some of Bunker Hill's history via the movies.
Yeah, Los Angeles Plays Itself, which I think that was really hard to see for the longest time. And I think that may be not on YouTube, but I think it may be on Vimeo. And yeah, it's like 4 hours long and has some great Bunker Hill stuff in it. Oh. If anyone is interested, somewhere, well, I actually put together a 30-minute clip reel just of Angel's Flight in the movie, which at some point I should really put somewhere because it's really good.
What street is Bunker Hill Street now?
Oh, it's not. Well, there's a little bit of Bunker Hill Avenue as it exists north of Sunset that sort of curves up into the hills. But where Bunker Hill Avenue was exactly between Grand and Hope. So here's Grand and there's Hope. So you figure Hill and Olive and Grand and Hope, and then Flower and Figueroa, and then so Bunker Hill Avenue went boop, 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 right in between Grand and Hope, and then so the hill itself, now you're looking not from above but towards it. So as the hill went like this, and then as the CRA came with their big plows, they just chopped the hill down like that. They took about 40 feet off the top, and they just made all of Bunker Hill Avenue, which was the top of the hill between Grand and Hope, just made it go away. They issued what's known as street vacation papers, meaning that it ceased to exist there.
Oh.
Much like Clay Street, which was between Hill and Olive, which ran for like 2 blocks between 4th and 2nd, and Cinnabar Street, and there was a little park called Sack Alley between Flower and Figueroa at like between 4th and 3rd. All these cute, cool little streets that just have disappeared into the ether.
Oh.
Oh, I have a
Where
question.
did the name Bunker Hill come from?
Excellent question. That has long been a source of not controversy, argument, discussion. There are 2 schools of thought. One is that, so it's 1874, and the forthcoming 100th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill from 1775, that is to say the centennial was going to be in 1875. And so Prudent Beaudry named the topmost little road on the hill Bunker Hill Avenue. And it was said that he named it thus because of the forthcoming centennial of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And then because Fort Moore had bunkers in it, they had built this sort of elaborate breastwork during the Mexican War in 1847. Some people say that the Bunker Hill, there's to say the street led towards these bunkers, that's why he named it Bunker Hill Avenue, is because that there were these fortifications. There was a newspaper article in like 1875, 76 that sort of alludes to both of these things. So there's really no, without actually digging up Prudent Beaudry and poking him or biting him with a vampire or however make him come alive and asking him, we're never really going to know, because all the study I've done in it is there's this one article that says it's a little of this, it's a little of that. But if you're asking the name Bunker Hill as it applies to the whole area, after they named Bunker Hill Avenue, the term Bunker Hill for the whole area itself didn't really happen automatically. No one actually looked at the area itself and said, oh, well, it's all Bunker Hill now. That didn't happen until about 1900. And finally, someone said in the papers like, well, the Bunker Hill area, XYZ. I think it's when they were talking about the Bunker Hill area needs a fire station. But before then, they called it like Olive Heights. They called it like the Hill area. They called it like, well, the Hill dwellers. Once they started building apartments there, they said like, oh, it's the Apartment Hill district. But about 1900, it really took off as like the Bunker Hill area, because they figured, you know what? The ridge atop with that Bunker Hill Avenue, that's good enough, sort of lends it its name.
Okay.
I have a question. I don't know how to use the chat.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Shoot.
Are you familiar with the 1962 movie called Angel's Flight by Dean Romano? I think
Yeah. I love that movie. With
I worked with
with-
Dean.
did you work on that picture?
No, I worked in the Hall of Administration for 30 years, and he came to work there as a temp. Interesting guy, and he had a very elaborate story about how that movie was stolen from him, and it was kind of underground for a long time, and then he finally got it back.
Right, because I want to say it's Raymond Nassour, and he made it with him, and they fought over who had the rights to it.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. I remember. I think Jim Dawson knew Dean Romano. Jim Dawson, who wrote the book of first Angel's Flight, and then wrote the book on Bunker Hill and the movies. And he had some interesting stories about Dean Romano. And I think he tried to find Dean recently to see, because no copy of that movie exists that we can find, except like a 3rd generation VHS.
Yeah, I think it's on YouTube. Dean died in 2011.
That's what I was going to say. It's like, and then we tried to find Dean, and he had passed on, and still somewhere there's got to be a, I don't know, 8/16, God willing, 35 millimeter print somewhere. But
you know, I did. The KCET showed it once. I stayed up till 3 a.m. to watch it. They had a film noir series, and that was the last one.
I think that's where the YouTube comes from. Somebody taped it off the KCET show
Yeah.
eons ago.
But Dean was an interesting guy because he also wrote the TV series Banachek.
Yeah. Man. Yeah, he was full and
a lot of science fiction books that I had no clue what they meant.
that means they're good.
I guess.
I have the same thing with Philip K. Dick. I read those and I'm like, it must be good. I have no idea what he's talking about.
But I just thought Angels, it had some really good visuals of what Angels Flight looked like in its waning years.
Yeah, no, I think it's really fascinating stuff because they'd filmed some of it around like 61 2.
Yeah.
And then from some of it, they did some pickup shots in like 64 5. And you could see like some stuff they shot and then they're shot in the same place and it had been demolished and it gets very confusing. And it's really an incredible picture. And I thought Indus Arthur, who was the sort of star of it. I mean,
Yeah.
Thorby was the star. He was the Marlboro Man. He was the star, but Indus Arthur was just incredible. They had they shot some great stuff that had never been photographed before.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's terrific. Dean he was a genius. That was a great picture. A very weird picture.
Oh, yes, I know.
Isn't there a Bunker Hill Tower now?
Well, yeah, no, I showed a picture of it there. The Bunker Hill Towers was one that was designed by Robert Alexander and built. You know, when they started the series started the demolition, they said, well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start building apartments for everyone to come back to. All the old people that got kicked out, they're going to come back. And instead they built the Bunker Hill Towers, which was all market rate, that none of the old people could move back into. They couldn't move back in until the anti-plaza was finished in 1980. So yeah, Bunker Hill Towers was opened in January of 1969. And there's still Bunker Hill Towers, although now I think it's condo.
Okay. Say, Nathan, why don't you give a shout out also to Ed Penny and his 16mm film?
Yeah, Ed Penny had a great 16. Yeah, that's right. Angel's Flight. Well, did he do? There was one of the last days of Angel's Flight, but Ed Penny's, which was interesting because it was shot over a number of years, right? Because it showed Angel's Flight as stuff was being demolished around it, as the Elks Lodge, and then other things were being demolished, and then.
No, it is amazing. It actually has the big demolition balls hitting buildings as Angel's Flight just keeps going up and down, up and down.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, they had shots of the Astoria being demolished right there, like 2 buildings away. Is that on YouTube or is that on, like, I think that's on Vimeo, right?
Well, it used to be really hard to get. I got Ed 20 years ago to let me get the 16mm print, but now it has, it's essentially in the public domain. There's some company that has it and one can get it. It may be on YouTube as well. So it's someday I think Angel's Flight's going to try to get a 15-minute loop in the Angel's Flight Museum so people can see it.
That would be great. That would be great because I know I saw it on the internet like now 5 years ago, and it was just like on some site. And then going back and looking for it again, I was like, I don't know where it went because that's just the way things are on the internet now.
And I think that you addressed this question was does Bunker Hill have anything to do with Fort Moore troops? And you said that was potentially one of the explanations of the.
Yeah, well, if you look at the promontory itself as running, you know, south to north, the northernmost end, everything's sort of above Temple Street. Of course, it wasn't Temple Street then, but in 1846-7, the Mormon Battalion was given the task of building this breastwork to defend the town. And that became Fort Moore, but named after Moore, who had fallen in, I think, the Battle of San Pasqual. And the military garrison was decommissioned in 1853 and sort of fell into disrepair. And there was a historical society at the time. I think it was like J.M. Gwynn and other like early historians of LA who were like, we have to be hot to, like, you know, save the old, you know, Fort Moore, and the city wasn't having it. They were like, nope, we're going to sell all this stuff. So that's where the first Protestant cemetery was, or I should say the first non-Catholic cemetery, because it was Protestant, but also the Masons and the Oddfellows had cemetery up there. And the city was not having it. And they were like, no, we sold to what was known as the city council, it's common council at the time. They sold it to the schools. And they built schools up there. And then, so the reason I consider it as sort of the northern part of Bunker Hill is because much of it was houses in the same vein as Bunker Hill. It was sort of this unbroken swath of houses and apartment buildings Milo Baker built a large Newsom house at like Broadway and Sand Street. And so even though that Fort Moore has its own sort of identity with the schools and the cemetery, and there was a race of lizard people that lived up there. I'll let you read the book to find out all about the race of lizard people who lived up on Fort Moore. It was also very much like Bunker Hill in that it was covered in these grand Victorian homes, all developed at the exact same time as Bunker Hill. The Chandlers lived up there, and Milo Baker, and all the early sort of movers and shakers. The difference being that Fort Moore was just sort of overlooked the plaza, and Bunker Hill, sort of overlooked everything sort of south of the plaza. And that's the story of the troops that were up there. That was the early garrison built to protect. I should mention too that was where the first flag raising was, July 4th, 1847, in Los Angeles, big whoop-de-doo. And they used to have a flag raising. It used to be the center of all patriotic activity used to be right up there on Fort Moore. And you wouldn't know that today, but that's where they would have a flag raising every 4th of July. It was a big to-do. And that's why now we have the Fort Moore Pioneer Memorial, which used to be the most embarrassing place in all of Los Angeles. But we have recently, because it was in such terrible disrepair and so terribly neglected, it has been recently restored, which shocked the heck out of me. And now it is gorgeous. And if you have not been by the Fort Moore Pioneer Memorial with a wonderful fountain, it's all cleaned up and just looks gorgeous. It's very mid-century modern. It's very Mad Men, very cool. So go take a look, see. It'll make your heart sing. Makes an old patriot like me happy. We are few and far between.
Any other questions? I have a quick question, because we had a discussion when we were preparing for this with you, and we were talking about the buildings that they tried to save from Bunker Hill. And are there any of the original buildings of Bunker Hill remaining other than Angel's Flight?
Wow. Yeah, no. So there were two that were especially dear to the people that would the Salt Box and the Castle at 339 and 325 South Bunker Hill Avenue, respectively. And the city was very hot to tear them down. The Housing Authority actually got demo permits for them. And at the 11th hour, Reckin Parks came through and said, no, we're going to start this little museum of Victorian Los Angeles. It's going to be in Montecito Heights. We're going to donate the land, and we're going to, CRA put up like 10 grand, Reckin Parks put up like 10 grand. We're going to cut these houses up. We're going to put them on flatbeds. We're going to take them to Montecito Heights. We're going to set them up. And these will be the two houses that will start this new Heritage Square. And that's how Heritage Square started. The houses, this was in March of it was through 1968. And in March of 1969, the houses were actually moved. And they became, if you read the papers of the day, they're full of rather colorful parlance about the hippies and their pot parties. So the hippies were they turned them into marijuana homes or whatever. And so they had a night watchman, and the miscreants drove off the night watchman, who refused to come back, which I didn't know hippies and their pot parties were so violent, but he wouldn't come back. And a couple months later, these houses were burned to the ground. Nothing left. Nothing left except if you go to the Heritage Square Museum, there's like a couple, there's some doorknobs and a couple little pieces. That being said, the sort of southern part of Bunker Hill still has, not in the same vein as 1870s, 1880s, wooden Victorian structures, but it still has, some great old buildings. I mean, you've still got, say the subway terminal building. Did you know that the oldest extant parking garage, I know you're like, this is not as exciting as a Victorian house, but the oldest extant parking garage in Los Angeles is on Bunker Hill. It's at 4th and Olive Street, and was designed by Titans, Curlett and Beelman. Very important stuff. And you still got Angel's Flight, but that's the long answer. The short answer to your question is no, there's nothing left. However, I may have found a house. Now I'm still getting all my ducks in a row. and it will be announced on my site, bunkerhilllosangeles.com. Go to bunkerhilllosangeles.com. And I'm thinking I'm going to meet this woman like on the 23rd, she says. And if I'm correct, now don't tell anybody this. I know there's 60 people out there. Keep your mouth shut. But if I'm correct, there was a house at 3rd and Olive, on Olive just down from 3rd, that was moved in like 1910. And it was like one of the real 1880s houses. And it was moved near Angelino Heights. And I think this may be this is a huge deal. This is an actual survivor. And it was basically they were going to put in an apartment building. Someone said, because house moving used to be a big deal back then. They moved houses all the time. And so I think I may have found a survivor, and it's going to be a big announcement. It's going to be streamers and glitter. It's going to be amazing. But yeah, but I can't promise you anything. I gotta make sure. But I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Wow.
I just wish I'd found that out before I,
Yeah.
wrote the book, but I don't know.
And what is your next project?
Good question. I don't know. That's also secret. I'm thinking there's a lot of stuff. I just finished a webinar from my friends at Esoteric on mausoleum architecture.
Okay.
So I really like our big public mausolea. But I'm thinking the next thing might have something to do with religious architecture in general, with mausoleum architecture as maybe a subset, fraternal architecture as a subset. But downtown was full of some pretty stunning churches. And once upon a time, Los Angeles, its church architecture before 1940 rivaled anywhere else in America, and most of it is lost. And I think that story needs to be told. I'm not saying that will necessarily happen, absolutely, but that has always fascinated me. And other than that, I have some other things, some other irons in the fire.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing what comes next.
Remember you had mentioned earlier that I was working on the book about the American mortuary?
Yes.
Well, it turns out there's this guy, not me, who's working on the book about the American mortuary, and that supposedly is coming out in 6 months, and I may have to hit him on the head and steal it from him, but it looks like someone else beat me to the punch. I waited too long.
Thank you on behalf of the Windsor Square Hancock Park Historical Society for joining us this evening. It was a fantastic webinar, just the kind of thing that helps us get through this, odd time. And we look forward to more of your projects in the future. And so everyone else, remember to look out for the notifications about our next webinar, which will be on the Hollywood Park Racecourse. And that's next month. I do not have the date on me, but but look out for those emails because they'll be coming through. So, and we look forward to seeing you all there. So, and with that, once again, thank our author and our host, Nathan Marsak, and have a good evening.
Thank you all.